Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Matt Diller, and today I will be talking about the ontology for general medical science. You go to the next slide. Beautiful. So OGMS has a pretty long history here in the Obo Foundry. It's been around for well over a decade now, although for the last 4 years, maintenance of it has kind of been dormant. Happy to say that we're picking back up with maintaining it, and we've started, I think it was in August or July, having our monthly meetings to go over for continued development of it, as well as updating it. So OGMS itself was designed as a mid-level ontology. It extends from BFO, which it uses for its top-level hierarchy, and then it just kind of generally, where it represents a lot of general medical and biomedical terms, specifically those that would be that would cover entities involved in clinical encounters. So these would be things like diseases, disorders, diagnoses, healthcare professionals, patients, etc. Next slide. And the origin of OGMS, for those of you who aren't aware, actually stems from a couple of workshops and a paper from the mid to late 2000s. Next slide. These workshops and this paper both set out to try to define and characterize what exactly is a disease ontologically, as well as identify some of the relationships between diseases and many of the other entities that typically come up alongside them in clinical encounters, including but not limited to diagnoses, signs and symptoms, as well as findings. And then in addition to that, they covered what the type of relationship that a disease ontology would have to other biomedical ontologies that existed at the time. So back then, I think those were FMA, Pato, and gene ontology. And then there were several other goals of the workshop and paper. All of this ended up coming together in the first version of OGMS. Next slide. And today, OGMS has expanded its coverage to incorporate things incorporate things in addition to disease and disorders, such as lab tests and different types of physical assessments, signs and symptoms, clinical data and findings, disease stages, therapies, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. So among these, as I've already mentioned, was disease. OGMS has kind of set the stage for standardizing how we view disease and disorder ontologically, or how we represent them ontologically. Disease is defined as a disposition to undergo pathological processes that exist in an organism because of one or more disorders in that organism. And then disorder is defined as a material entity which is clinically abnormal and part of an extended organism. We further say that disorders are the physical basis of disease. I think that when this term was originally coined and the label created and the label coined, there ended up being a lot of confusion as to why disorder was used as the label. And so because disease and disorder, at least in a clinical setting, are often used interchangeably. So there is, as a short-term goal of the developer team, an interest in relabeling this class to help avoid some of that confusion. Next slide. So in addition to this, OGMS was very careful to make a distinction between diagnoses and diseases. at the time, a lot of clinical terminologies such as snowbed CT did a very poor job at distinguishing between the two. At times, they actually conflated them. I think I looked at them recently, and they have addressed some of these issues, but at the time, I believe OGMS was one of the first to actually very carefully spell out the distinctions between them. And so we define diagnosis as a representation of a conclusion of a diagnostic process. And that diagnostic process is defined as a healthcare process that involves the interpretation of a clinical picture from a given patient and the assertion to the effect that the patient has a disease, disorder, or syndrome of a certain type, or none of these. So the distinction here being one, for diagnosis, it is a representation. It isn't of a disease or any of these other entities. Whereas the disease itself is a disposition. That is something that inheres in a physical entity. Next slide. So additionally, we represent disease stages. For this, we reuse OB's disease stage class, which they define as a part of an occurrence of a disease process, which is associated with position in the normal progression of the disease. And so we have different progression stages for cancer that are defined in OGMS, as well as some of the more common disease stages that you might find for things like infectious disease or even chronic disease, like asymptomatic disease onset, remission, and relapse. Next slide. We also represent a variety of different healthcare processes. So we define a healthcare process as a planned process with the objective to improve the health status of a patient that directly involves the treatment, diagnosis, or prevention of disease or injury of a patient. And from here, we build out a bunch of different classes such as treatment, hospitalization, healthcare encounter, etc. We do have a class for healthcare process assay, but we try not to represent some of the more granular types of assays that exist out there, and instead prefer to leave that work to other ontologies such as OB. Next slide. And lastly here, there are a number of different projects that currently are using OGMS to help structure the mid-level of their ontology. The idea here being that with OGMS functioning as a mid-level ontology, it does help to integrate a lot of clinical and translational ontologies that cover various aspects of biomedicine. So among these are the mental functioning ontology, the oral health and disease ontology, as well as the others I have listed here. Next slide. So we do have a bit of a backlog in our issue tracker just because the ontology hasn't been really carefully developed for the last 4 years. We are working at whittling away at some of these issues. And in addition, we've restarted our monthly meetings for OGMS, as I've already mentioned. We have these on the second Monday of every month. If anybody here is interested in either getting involved or in submitting other issues that or requests for terms, you could either visit our GitHub website or email me at the email address listed here. It's basically just my first and last name joined by a period at nih.gov. Next slide. I'd also like to acknowledge the extensive team of folks who have contributed to OGMS over the years. Some of these folks are still active developers of OGMS. Others have contributed at different points in time in, over the last decade to decade and a half. So next slide. And I guess, I don't know if we have time for questions or if we're taking questions in this meeting. But if we do, I'd be happy to answer any.